Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, exactly. Welcome. I'm Durba Mitra, the Richard Wolff Associate Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, and the acting director of the Arthur and Elizabeth Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America, filling in for Professor Robin Bernstein, who was unfortunately unable to introduce our speakers today due to illness. She wishes she could be present. So before I introduce our speakers, let me take a moment to thank Kim and Judy Davis, whose support makes this lecture series possible. I also want to acknowledge the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and all of our annual donors. Your generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public, and we thank you. Whether you're watching this in person or online, you can submit questions at any time using the Slido link that's provided on the screen behind me and posted in the chat feature of the Zoom webinar. Now, I am delighted to introduce today's distinguished speakers. It is a great privilege for me to be here, even momentarily, to praise these phenomenal women. Tomiko Brown-Nagin is Dean of Harvard Radcliffe Institute and the Daniel P.S. Paul Professor of Constitutional Law at Harvard Law School, as well as Professor of History in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences. She's an award-winning legal historian and an expert in constitutional law and education law and policy. Professor Brown-Nagin's latest book is the award-winning Civil Rights Queen, Constant Baker Motley and the Struggle for Equality, which explores the life and times of the path-breaking lawyer, politician, and judge. The Los Angeles Times, The New Yorker, Smithsonian Magazine, and Time all cite it as one of the best books of 2022, and it was recently awarded the Organization of American Historians Darlene Clark Hine Award. Civil Rights Queen has also been shortlisted for major literary prizes and optioned for a documentary film treatment. Her previous book, Courage to Dissent, Atlanta and the Long History of the Civil Rights Movement, won a 2012 Bancroft Prize in American History, the Liberty Legacy Prize of the Organization of American Historians, and the John Philip Reed Book Award by the American Society of Legal History, among many other honors. From 2019 to 2022, Dr. Brown-Nagin chaired the path-breaking Presidential Committee on Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery. As chair, she led the highly visible university-wide initiative and co-authored the committee's landmark report, which I urge you all to read, detailing the university's direct financial and intellectual ties to the history of slavery and dispossession. The efforts resulted in Harvard's unprecedented commitment of $100 million and hopefully ongoing commitments to redress harms to descendant communities in the United States and in the Caribbean. She is joined today by our honored guest, Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom. A path-breaking sociologist and public intellectual, Dr. Cottom is one of the most urgent contemporary voices on issues pertaining to race, gender, education, and technology. She is the voice of clarity in an increasingly bewildering world, offering acute analysis of the links between inequality and injustice in the 21st century. Brandeis University recognized exactly this quality when it awarded Dr. McMillan Cottom the Toby Gittler Prize from Brandeis for her, quote, critical perspective and analysis of some of the greatest social challenges we face today. McMillan Cottom has re-energized the form of the essay, or the Tressie, as some of her readers say. In the New York Times, where she's opinions columnist, The Atlantic, The Slate, and The Washington Post, as well as on social media and in books, McMillan Cottom combines careful scholarly analysis, passionate and poetic language, and calls for revolutionary action. Often drawing out multiple layers of meaning in a word or a metaphor and drawing boldly on her own rich experience as well as her fabulous sense of humor, McMillan Cottom illuminates paths forward on wide-ranging issues, from education to the Black family to ideas of mutual care for our present. Her book, Lower Ed, The Troubling Rise of For-Profit Colleges in the New Economy, reveals the cruel inequity at the heart of higher education in America and its pursuit of profit. Her most recent book, Thick, and Other Essays, of which many of us are great fans, investigates how Black women's lives are shaped by structural racism and inequality. Thick won the Brooklyn Public Library's 2019 Literary Prize and was shortlisted for the 2019 National Book Award in Nonfiction. It was named a top book in 2019 by Time, the New York Times Book Review, the New York Public Library, and the Chicago Tribune. In 2020, McMillan Cottom was named a MacArthur Fellow, a genius. Currently, associate professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill School of Information and Library Science, Dr. McMillan Cottom is also a senior faculty researcher at the Center for Information, Technology, and Public Life. With Roxane Gay, she co-hosted the popular podcast, Here to Slay. So please join me in welcoming these extraordinary women to the stage. The exceptional Dr. McMillan Cottom in conversation with Radcliffe's brilliant dean, Dr. Tomiko Brown-Nagin. Thank you so much.
Wow, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. And what a delight to have Tressie with us today, if I can call you by your first name.
You may.
Good.
And if I may, after honoring the dean for taking time out of what must be a grueling schedule, taking time to be here with me today.
Well,
thank you very much.
That's very kind, but this is just a treat for me. I am so excited. I have to tell you, every time I wake up to a Tressie column, I'm just delighted. And so to have the opportunity to speak with you in the flesh and to have you at Radcliffe is just fantastic.
I gotta say, it's very nice that you are always thrilled when a Tressie is released. I am always still, the morning one is released, I don't sleep well, still. For the record, that never passes. So thank you all for coming and for being on the other side of one of those columns every time it happens. Thank you.
Sure. So let's start with Thick.
Yes.
You write in Thick that your work is underpinned by what is still a radical idea, that Black women are rational and human.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can tell us what you mean by that and how that point of departure shapes your writing and your scholarship.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it is still very much a radical notion, and I use the word rational quite deliberately, in that it was a rebuke of the idea that you could always assume the positionality of Black women as being one rooted in, racial politics, and that you could assume what that meant, right? And because of that, you could dismiss Black women's political subjectivity as being a politics of grievance, which is, I think, still deeply embedded in our understanding of Black women's understanding of themselves as political subjects, but also our limited understanding in public discourse, and I would go so far as to say embedded in our understanding of them across many disciplinary knowledges of Black women, both individually and collectively, as being stand-ins for Black politics, like our personal lives, our inner selves as being stand-ins for Black politics, which sort of flattens our human experience to this linear Black narrative that is really just always a story about America's narrative, as if we are not a story about human experience. And then also, I'm almost always tweaking economics, and so I was also always just, I was also tweaking the idea of that. So I always take any opportunity to probably do that. But I was doing it in that essay, and I do it more implicitly in my work to say, not that Black women are infallible, but if we are fallible, it is not because we are Black women. That our rationality should be taken as a point of departure, just as you would take any other person's rationality as a point of departure. And that if you do that, that our complexities could lend itself to a better understanding of the complexities of our current political economy and our current realities. And then what I try to do is say, and this is what that would look like. Here's what you understand better or differently. Better is certainly subjective. I think you understand the world better if you endeavor to try to understand it from understanding Black women as being rational. And so let's take that out of the ether, right? Let's bring that down and let's try to touch it and let's try to make that gritty. So what that looks like, for example, is we love, there's a social media saying or cliche, trust Black women, that I think people take literally, which is, whatever Black women say, believe them. Which in and of itself is flattening, though. That is to say what? Black women can't be wrong, or Black women can't change their minds, or Black women can't be scammers, right? No, that is not what that means. How I understand it is that no, trust that Black women have a perspective on the world, and that if you interrogate it the way you would interrogate anyone else's, and then if you find fault, you attribute it to, I don't know, you can attribute it to them having imperfect information. You could attribute it to them having a need and they're trying to get over on you. You could attribute it to the fact that you are negotiating for something and they want to win. You could attribute it to them being highly competitive. You could attribute it to lots of things, but not to them being a Black woman. And that if you do that, one, I think that you become a better actor in our current environment, but I also think that you become a better interpreter of the social environment and the social reality. And then I try to show what that would look like over the body of work.
Wonderful. Let's talk about kinship and something else that you've written, which is that your essays always start with a question: why me and not my grandmother? Yeah. Why is that your starting point, and what concepts are you getting at with that starting point?
Yeah. Well, I'm getting at one thing that I think that some people find depressing, but I find oddly liberating, which is that for all of its sociological realities, Black life in America today is empirically better than it has ever historically been, and yet it is still empirically, cumulatively, structurally unequal. And I try to hold both of those realities at the same time. I try to recognize that my grandmother quite literally could not imagine my life. She used to say to me, "What are you, little girl?" That's what she used to say to me. She could not imagine my life. And at the same time, she could absolutely imagine my choices. She could imagine the constraints on my choices, at least. She would have understood, she wouldn't have understood the particulars, for example, of arguing about tenure, for example, at my job. But she would have understood why I had to argue about keeping my job, right? She would have understood that. And so trying to understand how I have these things that she could not have imagined, why me and not her, when she was, to my mind, and to the mind of many people who knew us both and loved us both, far smarter. And I think skilled in ways that if she'd had the structural opportunity to develop, would have been creative in ways that, I can probably only hope. I inherit a lot of my creativity from her. She had a playful, creative spirit that she really did keep almost all of her life. She was one of my first and earliest playmates. We imagined together, created plays and stories together. And so whenever I write something, I think I probably got a lot of that from her. But also the idea of that for her just didn't exist structurally, right? And so I think everything that is possible for me to be, of course, is about structural opportunity. And I always want to keep that in mind. One, I think it is a check on, my ambitions. But it is also a check on me about the importance of the intersection of biography and history, and that I could be as individually ambitious and talented as I wanted to be, and if the structure had not imagined the possibility of me, it wouldn't have mattered. And I like to keep that in mind because I don't want the lack of my imagination to make someone else impossible.
Wow. That is amazing.
And so I look
so
out
insightful.
across the landscape and and I think about what we were saying about trans children, for example, and I go, well, is this a problem of my imagination? And yes, it is. And me individually or me collectively, right? And I think, oh, that's an us problem, right? That to me is the thing I always want to have a check on, because that's what her life and holding those two up has taught me.
Well, let me ask you to talk a bit more about the question that you're often asked, which is whether you align yourself with the interests of Black people. In response to that, you know that, well, it's important to situate Blackness, right? To push back against the notion that Blackness is fixed,
Right,
that it is static, that Black people are not without contradictions, internal contradictions. And you specifically note the relevance of class to the Black experience and region. And we talked about how that resonates so deeply with me because we both have this Black Southern
That's right.
experience that so deeply informs our scholarship. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about why it's so important to unpack Blackness.
Well, one, I think that when we don't unpack it, it enables some of the worst impulses of people who would want to own it and sell it back to us, right, as a more as weapon than as tool, So I'm always, I'm always inclined to want to put a check on my own worst impulses. And so that's the first thing. It's like the big answer. But the more particular answer about, any, student of history, or even just a casual, reader of history, has to be attuned to the fact that that identity and people's understanding of themselves changes across time. And I have to believe that it is supposed to, right? And that it's supposed to. And that if you want to fix that in a period of time, you probably do more harm than good, right? That loving people isn't fixing them in time. And so if I say, I love Black people, I probably mean that to be an action, which means loving them in action across time, which means allowing growth and change and difference to happen. And so the part of that is to understand and accept those differences and being attuned to the fact that they exist, but also to acknowledge that my definition of Blackness is not the only one.
Right. That
we can't own it. It's not property to own it. It can really only be shared. And I think we have to accept the ways that people may not always find that are shared, that are, the way some people experience Blackness doesn't overlap 100% with ours, and that's not only okay, but probably natural. and that the places where they overlap are places for us to build shared experience, but not places for us to police the boundaries of those places. Where we fight to own it, again, doesn't serve us. Mm-hmm. Ownership is at the basis not of Blackness, but of anti-Blackness. Mm-hmm. And so I want to keep a check on that impulse. Mm-hmm. And I also think there's room for us to honor the parts of the Black experience that are unique to where we came from without dishonoring any other version of Blackness. I think it is perfectly fine to say that my experience of the Black experience that comes from the rural South, working class Black experience is authentic to me and means something special, and that in no way devalues any other Black experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Terrific. And before you became Tressie, the columnist, how did people respond to that complication? Because although you say people should know that it's true, that there's this subjectivity.
Yeah, they do know, I think.
They do know.
They have to know.
And they accepted?
No.
No.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, your own scholarship shows that. Isn't that the story of, they know, but accept is something else entirely, right?
Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I don't think they accept it now.
Yeah.
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's talk about popular culture.
Yeah.
You write about topics that some academics dismiss as unimportant or unserious, things like beauty, style, popular culture. Yeah. Why do these subjects matter? And why do you think some people don't want to concede that they matter?
Oh. I like this question, I think, but that means I could get in trouble.
Oh, it's okay.
Listen to you. Okay. Well, okay, so I think one of the really honest answers here is we don't like to do it because we aren't good at it. I know, I'm so sorry. I think some of it is, because fundamentally what that is that we're talking about the aesthetics of power, right? We absolutely know. It goes back to your previous question. We know. Do we accept it? Mm-hmm. I think that is a rejection of us accepting that this has, that these are statuses that hold power over us. I think we don't like that it holds power over us. And many of us have either opted out of valuing those things or feel somehow judged by the fact that those things exist, and so don't want to engage, and so we decide not to participate in these ways, which perversely gives them more power over us, right? My argument is it is precisely because we don't engage with them that they continue to have, I think, a disproportionate amount of power over intellectual production. And in some parts of popular culture, I think we give it more weight than popular culture does, which in some ways sort of brings some of the aesthetics of power down to size by making it malleable and accessible in a certain kind of way. So I think we should be in that space, and I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. When you live in a mediated world, a mediatized world, that is a world that plays with the manipulation of aesthetics. Right? In an internet world in particular, we're talking about two mediums. We're talking about discourse and we're talking about images. That's what the internet is. It's pictures of cats and it's tweets. That's the internet, right? Discourse, pictures. Where are we, right? That's aesthetics, right? So we think that we can just engage in the discourse part. But if you haven't been paying attention, the aesthetics are winning. The aesthetics are winning. I can tell you who knows this. Politicians know it. The financiers know it, and I think we know it. I'm just saying I think that we aren't playing in it in the same way. I think we aren't translating those power dynamics, and I think that's part of the role that we should be playing in public life, in helping the public make sense of some of the ways that those aesthetics are playing with ideas and power around us. So that's one of the reasons why I like to do it. And I also, there's a part of me that perversely enjoys being the person in the room sometimes, maybe, kinda, that just brings up, I know everybody sees the elephant in the room, right? Mm-hmm. So why not do it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about a recent example of your cultural critique.
Okay.
This was the video about blonde hair that got you banned from TikTok.
Right.
And inspired a lot of chatter and pushback. Tell us about your arguments and why you think people reacted so strongly to it.
They reacted so strongly, I think, precisely because it is talking plainly about the aesthetics of power. I have learned that you can talk about a lot of things in public, and yes, you can get angry mail. I've been getting angry mail for many years now. It doesn't quite bother me. I will say that the scale has changed, and Postal Mail actually does bother me just a little, because I just think of the effort that took. So I will say that this article, more than anything I have written in many years, did generate a lot of postal mail, and that has overwhelmed me over the last month or so, which is why you actually haven't seen quite the follow-up yet. I'm still processing all of that mail. And so I think it's two things. I think it's about the aesthetics of power and also where I assigned responsibility for the aesthetics of who deploys that power. So I think we like the idea of somebody doing something to us, right? Like, the patriarchy makes me do this. And to tell you the truth, I sometimes forget, academia did this to me, I sometimes forget the things that we aren't supposed to talk about in polite company. And this was one of those cases. I honestly said this casually. I forgot that we aren't supposed to say this around normal people. I just said, like blonde, and forgot that that's a thing. And that is because blonde is the way we talk about whiteness in polite, everyday company, and I forgot. That's all. I forgot. I forgot other people could hear me. I forgot that people don't know or they do know it's what they're doing, but they don't know it consciously, and I just forgot. That's all. And so that'll teach me a lesson. But then I decided to commit to the bit because I believed what I said, and I doubled down on it because I am an only child, and I never lost that impulse. And I did, though, and I thought I would, I have traveled around, and it really has kind of taken over my life a bit, my public life anyway. People feel very deeply convicted by this. Because what I was saying is we make up our world every day in our interpersonal interactions. The patriarchy isn't somebody standing out there, right? In the same way, racism isn't standing out there, right? Classism isn't standing out there. We remake those things every day in the things we do with and to each other, right? And because we have so many big, scary things going on that really have given us lots of boogeymen out there, we got the DeSantises of the world and the Trumps of the world, who just have different names, but the Trumps of the world. And we are really comfortable with a big, scary, nice enemy, but, we do it also to ourselves. Where do you think they get the language from? Why do you think it works? And I think that we are uncomfortable with realizing that that's what we have done, especially when you have, in the case of white guilt and racism, an entire system designed to make you feel blameless. And then you wrap all of that up in something that is supposed to be frivolous. It's just a little hair color, right? Frivolous. This is, I think, the trap of relegating the discussion of aesthetics to something unserious. I am often saying to my editor at the time, aesthetics should be on the politics pages. I think we should cover fashion on the econ pages. I'm serious. Why not? It moves billions of dollars in capital.
It does.
Why don't we? And I think if we thought about it more seriously, it wouldn't have sent so many people into a tailspin to say, well, this is economics, this is politics, and so I'm going to use the language of economics and politics to talk about what it is you're doing when you say, oh, I bet you are so happy that baby came out blonde. I don't know, why would I be? Why don't you explain it to me? That's all.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something very much in the news, and that's abortion and reproduction. And the recent Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade. There is no longer a federal right to reproductive choice. That issue is now being debated in the states. I wonder if you can reflect on what the fall of Roe means for the struggle for gender equality, and in particular, what it means for women's participation in the economic and the social life of the nation.
You know, I said when the Dobbs decision came down, and I should mention that two of my very good friends are long-time reproductive justice workers and organizers. And so they have been working on me for years about how I should not be surprised, right? You know, they've been working on tempering my outrage for a while. And so I was prepared to be very cool about, y'all are shocked, you're outraged, you know, when Dobbs happened, and still I was outraged and sad. And I was trying to process how that could be. And talked to my friends, and guess what? They were too. The very people who had been telling me for years, you know, that effectively Dobbs had been the reality for lots of women for many years. You know, we knew those things intellectually. Knowing them emotionally was something very different. And my emotional response at the time is something that I still feel and now think intellectually is even more defensible. The more rational I become about it, I'm even more committed to it. And that was, oh, this is the beginning of the rationalized administrative argument for pushing women back into the private sphere. And I've only become more and more certain that that is what we are seeing. And you can, to my mind, tie what Dobbs has done, the accelerated response. You know, many states in preparation had trigger laws, yes, but even for those that didn't, how quickly they had legislation ready after Dobbs, but then also how quickly the political rhetoric changed at the state level. Even in states that we had thought of as being fairly, if not liberal, certainly moderate on the issue of abortion, who didn't think that this was a politically winnable issue. We've seen in my own state, for example, the state of North Carolina, where we now think, were it not for our governor, which is still not considered politically safe, but that is right now our only line of defense, we are quite literally in the state of North Carolina thinking of ourselves as being at risk for reproductive choice in the state of North Carolina. And we're seeing that state after state, which says to me that that is the not the beginning, that we were in the middle. For some of us who thought that we were at the beginning of a process, we had missed the beginning. We're in the middle of this sort of transformation. And I see that as being connected to many things. I see that as being connected to the push to not just privatize public schools, but to delegitimize public school education. The idea that we can move public money to charter schools and homeschool initiatives. The idea being that labor mostly will be done not by men, but by women. I think that is tied to our idea of reinstating the idea of biological gender being a governing public policy. I think this is behind trans bans like those that we have seen coming out of Tennessee. I think all of these are connected, to my mind, as an all-out war on women in the economic sphere. And so I see Dobbs not as the beginning, but as sort of like the middle of that war, because what women cannot do when they do not have not just reproductive choice, but autonomy, is they cannot fully participate in public life. You cannot participate in public life when when the definition of you as an autonomous citizen is negotiated state border by state border, right? When your employer cannot be sure of what type of employee you are as you move from state to state, right? When you cannot make the same economic decisions as a home buyer, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as a traveling salesperson. I think about one of my very first jobs out of undergrad. I remember being so proud because I was old enough to rent a car on the company's dime, and their concern was, because I just turned, 24 or something, you had to be old enough to rent the car. And I'm looking back on, and I had to come and show the person in HR that I'd just finally gotten old enough, to be on the company's insurance so that I could get the company car. And I was thinking about, what is it that you would have to prove to your company now that you could, do company business, state to state, as an employee, in their state? You don't have the same assumption, I think, of full autonomy as a worker, which of course was the economic case for Roe many years ago. But we take for granted that states will interpret that the same state by state. And the argument was that we shouldn't have to take that for granted. And what we've seen in the political rhetoric is that we cannot take that for granted. I don't know, I think we should be asking you what the sort of like overall legal response is to that. When I'm talking to legal scholars in North Carolina anyway, they do not sound particularly hopeful. They're telling me things like, we have to basically do what the right has done state by state with a judicial response, which is, organizing a judiciary that will do these cases state, but that is a 40-year response. What kind of economic decisions do women make in that 40-year span? And what do we tell people, what do we tell them, how do we tell you to predict your life in the meantime? I find it all overwhelming, and that's what I think my gut felt that day, and my brain is still catching up to it.
And I have to say that a lot of people felt the way that you're describing, that emotional reaction, although there was a leak. And we knew that this was coming down the pike, right?
Yeah.
To actually hear about the decision, to read the decision, was just on another level of recognition of where we are in the many ways you describe. Well, let's talk about social media.
Okay.
Which also involves the court and Congress. There recently were hearings about TikTok, discussions about potential national security threats. The Supreme Court heard a case examining whether Those who allege harm by social media should be able to sue technology companies who host certain platforms. Then there's Elon Musk and his continued reign over Twitter. So a lot going on in the world of social media and the potential for regulation of it or not, even banning popular platforms. I wonder if you can react to those developments from your position as a sociologist, but also as one who's deeply engaged in the world of social media.
I will actually be, my colleagues and I debate the possibility of regulation. I would be surprised if we see serious regulation in the near term. I think we are seeing a lot more political theater around not regulation, but the romance between technology firms and politicians is maybe souring just a little, but that's not the same as having political will to regulate.
Right.
And so one of the things my students and I were just debating this last week. We were watching some of the testimony for the CEO of TikTok, and I was like, we want to separate some of the political theater from legislation. And so I'm not as gung-ho on the idea that we might see regulation from either party, actually. Some of what I think is driving, however, the political theater that we are seeing is that the potential for class action lawsuits from the fallout from the documents that we have from Meta about child endangerment and mental health does change the risk calculus for technology companies just a bit. And so I think that has technology firms a little bit defensive and has changed the political calculus for some elected officials to at least have a political position on the responsibility of technology firms in a way they didn't feel like they needed to have a position on it 5 or 6 years ago, when we were a bit more enamored with technology firms enabling democracy. When we believed that the unfettered access to social media and information was enabling global democracy, you didn't need to have a position paper on protecting the young people from the internet. Well, now when parents are concerned about their children's exposure to content that may, damage their self-esteem, now you need to have a political position on that. So I think that's the calculus that has changed. But we still have to reckon with the fact that we have a regulatory structure that does not give us much that we can do to regulate technology firms as it stands now. We would have to do some serious litigating, and technology firms would push back. So unless we want to overhaul and fight some very serious legal battles, I don't see a real serious regulation happening. I think mostly what could happen would be in changing consumer patterns about how we use social media firms. I think that would do more to change the political will to do any regulation than anything that is likely to happen in the political sphere right now. I think if we fell out of love with social media platforms, which I actually think is far more likely to happen. I think that the revenue models for social media are shaky. That's what Elon Musk is discovering, by the way. Which I actually, listen, I think he plays at being, I do think he is more inept than his, I think he is, this is a real fine line to walk, by the way. I think he is more inept than his hype, but many of us maybe are, but he's more inept than his hype. He is not as inept as he pretends. Fine line. I think he is playing into a particular narrative there. I think he knew what Twitter's economic challenges were, I think he's playing at another type of game. Everybody knew you couldn't make money, that it had reached its economic potential. That's why they were looking for someone to sell it to. Everybody knew that the ad structure was gone. Facebook knows the ad structure is gone. Unless we come up with something else, everybody kind of knows that the revenue stream for social media is drying up. I argue that between that and social media becoming more and more difficult to use in an enjoyable way, our effective relationship with social media is declining. I think that's going to do more than regulation is ever going to do. Now that brings us TikTok. Now TikTok is a challenge because TikTok has something that the other major social media platforms do not have. TikTok is actually still fun. And I just said I think that is purely objective, truly. Yes, their algorithm might be more powerful, but it's actually not more powerful in the economic sense. Like, it's not better at micro-targeting and selling you things. It is better at identifying your effective triggers, right? It's fun. Facebook hasn't been fun in years, right? Twitter's only fun until you figure out how to use it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. TikTok is very fun, and the more you use it, the more enjoyable it becomes. I think that is actually what has made it that paired with its ownership structure, being a Chinese-owned company, has made it a political target. And I think they are using its ownership structure to as anti-competition strategy. That's my position on it. It's the only enjoyable social media platform, and they're doing some anti-competition targeting there.
So we have a lot of questions from the audience. I'm going to start to weave those in, but first I want to continue on current events. You have written so insightfully about the political economy of higher education, including student loan debt cancellation, and how some opponents view cancellation as a kind of government handout. Okay. I would love for you to talk about that reaction to that beneficiary class and the reaction to another recent example of government intervention. This is with the bank failures, and how there was action to rescue that class of beneficiaries, depositors, most of whom were very well off in terms of their resources, and that happened in a weekend, right? So talk about that. What is it? What are the values that are at play in our understanding of who deserves governmental aid?
And that is the exact right word, values. Student loan debt cancellation has never, ever been about economics. It has always been about values. It has been clear to me from the beginning. It only becomes, I think, more clear to more people the longer the debate stays in the public discourse. You know, handouts for me and none for thee. You know, the idea that what happens in the banking sector can impact the rest of the economy, I believe them. I believe you, sure. I lived through the Great Recession. I also know that if you can contain that, you could have contained any inflationary fears that would have spilled over from student loan debt cancellation. That's what I believe. And so far, no one has been able to disprove it. I've asked very smart people many, many, many times. They may get angry when I ask, but they don't say it's impossible. They just say it would be difficult. And that is not the same thing, because difficult just means your values don't align with the actions. That doesn't mean it cannot be done. All right. I told some students this recently and they were alarmed. I think the fact of the matter is people who hold student loan debt are not viewed as, not even sympathetic, which I think we know that much. I do not think they are thought of as being productive citizens, right? Not in this like job creator sense and all of that type of thing. but that they are more productive as debt holders. That is their contribution, right? I borrow here from some work from a fellow sociologist, Louise Seamster, who's talked about how in a financialized economy such as ours, that your relationship with your government becomes negotiated through debt. And you are either the creditor or the debtor, right? It is not about job or worker. Our relationship to the state is about you're either a debtor or a creditor. And so forgiving the debt in some weird way would be canceling out this is your value to us, holding the debt. And I just think we just sort of like refuse to let that go. Yeah, we just don't value, you're more valuable to us with the debt. That's all there is to it.
Wow. Well, that is a very direct and I think accurate analysis of that.
Thank you.
So let's talk about book banning, the move to disallow engagement with history, race, gender, slavery. There's a question coming from the audience about why academics aren't being more vocal when questioning the censorship, the ban on...
Wonderful question.
Yeah, AP and AP Black Studies.
Yeah.
Why do you think all of this is happening now?
Oh, now, yeah, why is this happening now? The election of Donald Trump cannot be overstated, not because he won, but because of how he won and how he governed revealed, I believe, how much our institutions relied on a basis of just that our institutions operated on faith, that there was no sense of accountability or checks and balances. And once that faith, that fundamental they work because we all just kind of sort of believe you did the thing. Once that was blown, right, it was open season on everything. Once you could just say, oh no, they just took the votes, the ballots are just gone. And there was no accountability or checks or balances on any of that. Every social institution that especially were weakened, the infrastructure of those institutions had been weakened from years and years of delayed maintenance and in some cases deliberate underfunding. In the cases of schools, especially public institutions and libraries, especially those in poorer communities and minority communities, right? So you have the intersection of those things, right? We hadn't maintained and cared for our infrastructure, and many of them were really only running on faith. So when the faith crumbles, right, there's no one there left to defend it, right? This is an ideal time then to attack those institutions. Why aren't we speaking up? We are part of what wasn't maintained. I mean, you know, except for some corners of higher education, we are part of some of the infrastructure that has been systematically underfunded, undercared for, and under-maintained. Public institutions, historically Black institutions, minority-serving institutions, the over-reliance on contingent faculty, even if you're not contingent in some institutions, underpaid, teaching extreme loads, you know, who isn't showing up, you know, are a lot of people who had tried to show up for a very long time and I think are demoralized, under-supported for a very long time. Having said that, I really do want to turn to a couple of bright spots, which is I do not think it is a surprise then that in this moment we are seeing some massive surprise, maybe not surprising, I should say surprising, but a massive amount of collective organizing in higher education, mostly led by graduate and student unions, graduate workers, and service workers in higher education. I think in part because the institutional structures have crumbled right in front of their eyes. Those of us with tenure or adjacent to tenure haven't sort of stepped into the breach, and that has revealed the places where those people who do see themselves as workers, see themselves aligned with each other, have done collective action. That makes me hopeful. I am also, however, deeply dispirited by the fact that the very people who benefit the most from these institutions, from our institutions existing, have not stepped into the gap more to make a case for why we are here and why we exist, and if need be, to just stand at the doors of libraries and schools where they are physically removing books, where they are physically removing evidence of history. Last week, what was it? They're not going to show that one in the state of Florida, which of course is ground zero here. Yeah, you just can't get around it, right? Ground zero. They removed a movie. One parent is all it takes. One parent can not like something on a teacher's curriculum and it can be removed. They removed the showing of a film about Ruby Bridges because one parent didn't want her child to find out that white people don't like black people. That was the argument. Yeah. Yeah. We should then be showing the film on the side of the schoolhouse. And I mean it. No. I mean, until you, and our argument is, but then they win, because that's what they want, right? They want us to not show up, or they want us to show out, and they want us to break the social norm. They want us to break the violation. And I'm going, I don't think you understand. They want us to not exist. Then in the face of wanting us to not exist, the most radical thing you can do is to exist. You don't actually retreat, you exist. Let me tell you who knows that. Trans people know that. Let me tell you, people of color know that. Minoritized people know that. Vulnerable people know that. You show up when people do not want you to exist. That's when you exist the loudest, right? If we ever knew, we have forgotten. It is a real good time to remember.
Let me get to another audience question, and it's a big one. Someone wants to know about your recommendations regarding artificial intelligence and equity. The way AI, such as GPT-4, is trained seems so white, the commentator says.
Oh, it doesn't seem. Well, I mean, you know, that's a numbers game, but yes, it is. You know, I actually just came from yesterday where we talked about artificial intelligence quite a bit. This is one of those cases when we talk about artificial intelligence, I think it is an important moment for us to separate its marketing from its existing capacity while understanding that, yes, its potential, right? In being critical of its hype, we can sometimes reinforce its hype. So when people talk about artificial intelligence being transformative and we go, oh, this transformation is going to kill millions of jobs and it's going to end you know, education as we know it, well, then you're accepting the hype as truth. And I think we're not quite there yet. So yes, it's trained on data sets that absolutely reinforce not just whiteness, but, you know, Westernness. But also, it hasn't completely decentered and destabilized all institutions, and I'm not quite sure that it will. I think it will do many things in the near midterm. I'm not exactly sold on the idea, for example, that it is going to, you know, displace significant parts of healthcare, that it's going to take over tons of support service work. I'm not entirely sold on the idea that it's going to be able to program complex technologies, for example. But, you know, if we get to that case, I think we've got some other questions. I do think we need to be very critical about, however, wanting to tool it to be more diverse until we know what it can do. I think we need to ask more critical questions about what are we programming it to be more diverse for? Because if artificial intelligence, for example, is going to be used to do better and more efficient sorting, signaling, stratifying, and stigmatizing in the case of surveillance, then I don't want it to be any better at identifying people of color. We're already pretty efficient at identifying and stigmatizing people of color. It can stay white if it wants to do that. Right? I don't want to feed it then more images of people of color, if that is what we're going to do with it. And currently, with our regulatory structure on artificial intelligence and how we're using it, it is just as likely that that's how it will be used and it will be innovated in police surveillance before it will do anything beneficial for healthcare. Like, let's be honest. Right? If it accumulates to our current political economy, it'll be picked up by police departments before it would be picked up in cancer care research. And so until we have a regulatory structure that tells us how and where that's going to work, I think I'm a little more cautious about wanting the data sets to be more diverse just on its face, right?
Right. Tressie, let me get you to respond to this one last question. And it is, what advice can you give Black women reckoning with the challenges of remaining committed to one's truth in institutions that beg us to abandon ourselves? In brief.
I know. In brief. You know, you take what works for you and you leave what doesn't. And I think that is the great story of being part of any, you know, small group in a big pond, which we still are. We leave a big footprint because we are a big people who's done amazing things, but I think it's important to remember that is still fundamentally the story. And so you take what works and you leave what doesn't. When your story is so different than the story of the people who produced you, you can feel responsible for taking it all in, right? Taking advantage of everything that the people around you didn't have the opportunity to do. But you cannot, right? You can't make up for everything denied to people you love, and you can't make up for everything that didn't happen or could have happened around you. You can only take from the institution the things that work for you and your particular, you know, weirdnesses and your particular needs and especially in your particular interests, and you leave behind what doesn't. And that includes the things that would make you over in the institution's image in a way that separates you from the people and the places that you love and that love you back. So any part of professionalization or socialization that separates you too far from the spaces and the people and the places that make you feel healthy and whole is, I always think, a price that is too high to pay. You know, you keep the parts you love. The great library, right? The wonderful books, the great ideas, but I don't think you need to take the places that tell you you shouldn't speak that way, all right? Or don't tell those stories, right? Or don't mention that part again, or you know, maybe I wouldn't dress that way, all right? Or I have such a hard time pronouncing that name. I don't think you have to actually take or accept those parts. Do you run the risk of being isolated a bit when you do? Yes, but you run the risk of being mentally unwell and isolated if you do it. Or at least that's always been my calculation. And I have always figured that what was the point of being externally successful and being internally unwell? I've seen those people, and I think that must be horrible. So take what works, leave what doesn't, try to find a happy medium between just enough external validation that, you know, you can live with it, but not at the expense of what you need to be mentally well. And I wish you all good health and good wellness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amazing. So I want to say, Tressie, thank you for that. That was amazing.
Thank you.
It was amazing.
Thank you
And
very
thank
much.
you all for being here today and for your questions. I invite you to join us in the Lyman Room next door in Agassiz for a light reception. And I hope to see you back at Radcliffe really soon. Have a good evening.